Hi, Steph.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Katie and Bailey. I'm wait a few more minutes to see more people come on. Mm. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
I did it all by myself.
Which, by the way, Joan, before we get started, I have to tell you, over the weekend, I think I got what you got not too long ago with the compromise. Well, just a phishing, it's just a trap. But I got a huge pop-up on my desktop when I think I was trying to get to zip forms, and it was like, call Apple support. Your thing has been compromised. I like texted Willis right away. And I was like, is this legit? And he said no. And anyway, but I was like, this is sophisticated. I could see if this is what happened to
Oh,
Joan.
totally. You
It
think
looked,
you're calling Apple support and you're giving them everything.
yeah.
Or I did.
So,
Yeah, when it happens, I'm sure Willis told you, but when it happens again, just hit delete, um, and then escape.
yeah, I just like cleared everything too then. So,
Yeah.
okay, we can get on
All
with, sorry
right.
about our personal drama, guys, but it's a lesson for us all not to be, uh, don't fall for those computer scams.
All right, I'll get started. What we're talking about today is moving toward a successful closing when contingencies are satisfied. It was a little wrong in the calendar for, um, it said after an accepted offer. I'm taking even a smaller time during the transaction. When the contingencies are satisfied, they're done. And you're just moving to closing. And sometimes that can be 2 weeks, sometimes that can be 4 weeks, whatever. But it is a period of time that, um, since there are no more contingencies, a lot of agents, as I refer to later, go phew, and, work on other business that they have that is more urgent. But I want to just pinpoint that this period of time is very important. So, when, and I just want to state this, when working with a buyer client, your duties and responsibilities and servicing do not fade away when you are clear to close and all contingencies are satisfied. There are still many provisions to your binding contract that have to be called attention to. Um, since there are no more contingencies, it, the buyer's agent can go, phew. And it's a good time for you to just say, okay, this one's in the box and I can move on to other deals that I have. But to the buyer, it is still a time for anxiety and nerves, especially if it's the first buy. And even more experienced buyers. This is sort of a black hole in the transaction a little bit. So that is why it is time to continue to touch base with your client on a regular and predictable schedule. You may not have much to say, but I think it's very important to regularly check in with your buyer, even though everything looks good, and just make sure that they don't have any questions or what are they thinking, or how are they feeling, and that kind of thing. As we know, even when contingencies are met, buyers and sellers can be unpredictable at any time. Translation, that means they might be getting cold feet and looking for a way maybe to get out of the contract. Your responsibility is to think ahead and be prepared for any issue that may arise. Keeping communication with your client and the other agent is critical. So I would even set a schedule, make sure like Monday afternoons at 1 o'clock, you are going to call your client and the client knows that they can rely on that schedule. Thank you. When all the contingencies have been satisfied and documented, there is a period in the transaction when the buyer's agent still needs to be engaged, when stuff can still happen. So these are, I'm going to be listing through the provisions, basically on line 453 to the end of the contract. I'm using the lines that are in the residential offer to purchase. So of course, the lines will be different in the condo or vacant land or whatever, but these instructions still apply to whatever kind of offer you are engaged in. So on line 453, property dimension and surveys. Buyer should verify dimensions. Ask that of your buyer. Have you verified the dimensions that are on the property and the room sizes and things like that to your satisfaction? We had a buyer that got very mad because he found after he moved in that the property was measured incorrectly. And that was a very serious thing to him. But it is, and it's stated very clearly, I think even in bold in the contract, that he is the one responsible to make sure before he closes that those property dimensions look good. They don't need to get a whole survey, but they can, if they're working on vacant land, they can get something from their builder for dimensions. If they're working just in a residential home, they can get out their tape measure and make sure. But it is up to the buyer to verify dimensions. Line 458, buyer and seller authorize their agents to distribute copies of the offer to buyer's lender, appraisers, title company, and any other closing services defined by RESPA. Do not hold back any copies of the offer or amendments from these RESPA services. It's very important. And so there's a part of the transact in the offer to purchase that reiterates this. Line 465 is titled maintenance. Seller to maintain the property and all personal property in the same condition as the date of the offer on line 1. We have complaints about this, especially sellers that don't mow their lawns or maintain, the newspaper delivery, or well, we don't have newspaper delivery anymore, but make sure that the property is maintained. And say if the garbage disposal breaks down, the seller should take care of little things like that. Maintain it to the way it looked when the buyer wrote the offer. More provisions, and I have on the left side the lines and the title of these provisions. Property damage. This happens pretty often, and it is a result of a lot of the calls that Steph and I get. Something happens to the property after the inspection. Well, they actually say from the time of acceptance, that if there's any damage in an amount of not more than 5%, that's the 5% of the purchase price, seller shall promptly notify buyer in writing, will be obligated to restore the property to materially the same condition as the date of the offer, no later than closing with the lien waivers and required permits. If more than 5% of the purchase price, buyer may terminate the offer at his option. I have a quick story about that. I had a sale And it was an in-house sale, so the listing agent was a colleague of mine. And I had this buyer. We were all set to close, and a big storm came, and a huge tree fell on the garage and part of the back of the house. We got estimates, and it was more than 5% of the purchase price. So my buyers had the option, excuse me, I was the listing agent. So the buyers had the option to terminate at that point, and they got some estimates and all kinds of things. We kept extending the closing until everybody had all the information they wanted, and then the buyers decided that they would keep the house, and they worked out a deal between the seller and the buyer to repair and everything. But the seller has to repair if it's less than 5%. But if it's more than 5%, the seller doesn't have to repair, and they can negotiate with the buyer to come to an agreeable situation, or the buyer can just serve a notice of termination. The next provision is buyer's pre-closing walkthrough. Steph and I get a lot of questions about this. First of all, the buyer's agent and the buyers must make an appointment and get permission to enter the house for this walkthrough. Even though they may have been through the house a couple of times, they know the lockbox, everything, the buyer and the buyer's agent cannot just go over there and check it out. There have been complaints and even fines issued when people violate this. So that's a little bit of a warning. But within 3 days prior to closing, at a time pre-approved by seller or seller's agent, buyers shall have the right to walk through the property to determine there have been no significant changes in the property, except those that are agreed to by both parties, and that any defects the seller has agreed to cure have been repaired in a manner agreed to. Sometimes the buyers like to bring their inspector back. That is not considered proper through a walkthrough. That would be asking for another appointment and letting the seller know that they want to come through with their inspector to check on the curing of the defects. But it's not for the final walkthrough. Final walkthrough is just to make sure that it looks like it did at the time that the offer was written. So it's a time to look for light fixtures you thought were staying, or utilities that, all of a sudden the water heater is gone, things like that. You got to make sure that everything had been agreed to and that the buyer sees when they go through the walkthrough. But we do have questions about it. There are sometimes arguments about it. There are sometimes threats of terminating the contract over it. So make sure that you understand what a walkthrough is and proceed preparedly. Another one is occupancy. Occupancy of the entire, now this is the state of Wisconsin. So if you have buyers from out of state, they may know differently, but you have to make sure that they understand. Occupancy of entire property shall be given to the buyer at the time of closing, provided in this contract on lines 548 to 570, or in an addendum O attached to this contract. So there is a provision in the offer to purchase, but a more clarified occupancy agreement is pulling in the addendum O. Unless modified in the offer to purchase, property shall be in broom swept condition and free of all debris, refuse, and personal property per any agreements. There is there is a clause in our clause library that you must put in your offer. So it says, unless modified in the offer to purchase, it reads that the property shall in broom swept condition. In our library, there is a clause that you can insert in your offer to purchase that says more than the broom swept condition. It is in conditions that have been addressed, defects have been cured. All of these things are more specific than the phrase broom swept condition. So make sure that if you are going to go into a property and writing an offer on a property that probably will have some defects, it's older and may have some conditions, make sure you put this phrase in.
I'm gonna see if I can find it
Yeah,
and tell you guys exactly what it is.
good.
Exact wording. But keep going, so it
Okay.
might take me a minute.
The next section, and it's a pretty big section in these last pages of the offer to purchase that are just readable. There are no boxes or anything, and unfortunately, sometimes buyers and buyers agents don't pay much attention. So today is a reminder to pay attention to these last pages. It's pages 9, 10, and 11. A little bit of page 8. But this section on default, it's on lines 487 to 506. Remember, that's in reference to the residential offer to purchase. So the lines are going to be different in other offers, like condo and stuff. But under default, it has seller and buyer each have the legal duty to use good faith and due diligence in completing the terms and conditions of this offer. Now, this is there for your buyer to read and understand. A material failure to perform any obligation under this offer is a default that may subject the defaulting party to liability for damages or other legal remedies. Read carefully the lines of 490 through 496 to learn what happens when a buyer defaults and when a seller defaults. This is very important to pause and really carefully explain to your buyer. Actually, before they find a house, before they write an offer, have them understand, first of all, that as a buyer's agent, you are not their lawyer. As compliance broker, we are not lawyers either. So what we are dealing with is our reading of the offer to purchase, the contracts that we use that are approved by the WRA. Other than the wording that is in the contracts, going beyond that is considered legal advice, and we cannot dip into that. So your role during default, I mean, that's if all of a sudden the seller is not performing and things are looking rocky in the contract, or your buyers, say, getting cold feet, wanting out. Maybe, obviously, at this point, they don't have any contingencies left. So getting out of a contract with no contingencies, that is considered defaulting on the contract, breaching the contract. So at this point, giving advice or what to do next is providing legal advice that we cannot give to our client. And this is usually when Steph or I will get a call from the agent. You know, my buyer doesn't want to close, you know, certain things that they have discovered or certain things that have happened in their life or whatever, they've decided, even though all the contingencies are met, they don't want to buy this house. And that's when you go to these lines under default. I think it's on page 10. It breaks down to what do you do when a buyer defaults and what do you do when a seller defaults. Make sure that you go over those sections of the offer to purchase very carefully with your buyer or seller and have them read that. And if they cannot resolve the situation by more negotiations, then an attorney should be consulted. So you are not having that role anymore. The next provisions section in these last pages is entire contract, and sometimes this is just passed over. You don't pay attention because it seems so obvious. But we have had situations where it wasn't obvious. So under entire contracts, lines 507 to 509, it means that the contract contains the entire agreement of the buyer and seller. This agreement binds and inures to the benefits of the parties to this offer and their successors in interest. This means anything that is not in the contract or amendments is not enforceable. What is enforceable is the entire contract and all of the documents that go with the contract that are attached to the contract. So consider that discussing that with the agent gives more import, I think, to the idea that this is something you don't default on. This is something you don't breach. It is bound into a total agreement between buyer and seller. Further provisions on page 9 of the offer to purchase. There's a line under sex offender registry, line 510, which means you don't give your opinion on if there's a sex offender in the area. You don't look it up for your buyer. You don't give assumptions or anything like that to your buyer. The only thing you can do is, if they're concerned about this, is direct them to this link, www.doc.wisconsin, and it's supposed to be a .gov. So direct them to where they can find the information. Don't provide the information or provide assumable information. The big section, line 513 to 542 in the offer to purchase is the FIRPTA, or the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. This is if your buyer is a person from a foreign land and not an American citizen, they are subject to a tax when they sell in any property that they own in the United States. And if they don't pay it, the buyer of the property is responsible to pay that tax. So what we make sure that we do is research this before we close to make sure the seller or the buyer has paid their taxes and is aware of it. So your buyer doesn't have to come in and pay that tax. I said, if you really have any questions, read the lines 513 to 542 carefully and contact title. They'll be able to help you with that as well. Seller payment of compensation to the buyer's firm. Now, this is a section that was added after August of last year with the new lawsuit, NRA lawsuit. And this is a place where if the buyer's agent has no idea whether they are going to be compensated or not, there's not a compensation agreement or anything given to the buyer's agent or from the listing agent or the seller. You use these lines to ask what you are looking for as an offer of compensation. So if there's no other offer of compensation to your buyer's agent, to you, make sure that you fill out line 543 and put in the compensation that you are expecting when this transaction closes. So it is becoming more and more of the trend using the offer to purchase. I'm seeing, I don't know, Steph, if you feel that way too, but we're seeing less and less of the offer of compensation to the buyer's agent, and more that the buyer's agent is putting it in the offer to purchase.
1000%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot cleaner.
Hmm.
Then you don't have to go back and adjust the commission the seller is paying or anything. I think small other things that are on, I think these are all on page 10 and 11. Wire fraud, that's a big paragraph that has been added in all of our documents, in our listing documents and our offers to purchase. But it's just make sure it's a responsibility to you and to your buyer. So you have to educate your buyer. Do not initiate any wire transfer until you confirm wiring instructions in person or by you calling a verified number of the entity involved in the transfer of funds. Always back it up with a direct phone call to the um, verified number. Never use contact information provided by any suspicious communication. It would usually be an email to you saying, verify this transfer, and it gives the phone number. Don't ever use that phone number. Always call the title company, get the right phone number to make sure that it can verify the transfer of funds. Do in the counter or rejection lines. We have calls and issues with this where the seller, the listing agent, when they receive an offer, they don't fill in those lines 620 to 621, where it says we are going to counter this offer or we are going to reject this offer. It needs to be initialed, and there's so many times we don't get that initial, and it looks it's confusing. It's not a clear instruction. So make sure you always initial those lines if you're going to counter or reject a contract. And that actually goes to the buyer's party if the seller is sending an amendment. On line 592, there's where you can attach the GMAR, make sure it's a GMAR, addendum A. And then on addendum A, there's a place to attach other documents, as in S and all the other documents, addendum O, if you're going to use that, where you can attach that at the back of addendum A. But you can attach addendum A to your offer to purchase for using those lines on 592. And make sure you attach these addendums. And there's a bold paragraph right before the signature lines. Prior to the seller's signature lines is the reminder that, as accepted, the warranties, representations, and covenants contained in this offer survive closing and the covenants of the property. The seller agrees to convey the property on the terms and conditions as set forth in this and acknowledges receipt of the copy of this offer. It's written in bold because this is very important. And it does survive closing anytime we may get into a legal dispute. This bold statement is very relevant and very important, that all of these representations are still true after the closing. Again, these are lines that we really kind of read over and don't concentrate on, and that's what we're sort of doing today. It's very important that you attach the GMAR Addendum A for more protections and provisions with your offer. Many items and provisions in the Addendum A don't relate. There's a whole sections about well water and sewage treatment and things like that. So if you're writing in Shorewood, those are parts that you would totally skip over. But there is still other protections in the GMAR Addendum A that work. And it's basically a document that has been grown over the years by lawyers. It is a buyer consumer protection document, if you want to look at it that way. So it's important to use it, even if you feel that there aren't not many things that are applicable. In the addendum A, it is still good to attach it. So this is basically what I have for today's topic. And it is something that we don't really concentrate on that much. The final pages of the offer to purchase, but we felt that it was really important to get to these areas and make sure that you do read them with your client, and the client understands every last line in our offer to purchase. Any questions with anybody?
Yeah, this is definitely one I don't think we've ever touched, which is great.
No.
So thank you.
Well, I remember as an agent skipping over a lot of that too.
Yeah,
But what I really, when it became aware how important it was, is when I became manager. Well, eventually as an experienced agent. But when I became a manager and now here as a compliance broker, this is where we get a lot of questions. A lot of things about the walkthrough and uh, finishing agreements that were made in the contract, but now people are forgetting that they were made in the contract.
right.
So when we get a lot of questions regarding that, that's where we thought maybe we should spend a little time on this. So prepare yourself and give us a call anytime you have a question.
We'll see you guys next week.
Yep. What is next week? It is Andrew Keel.
Yes,
Is
and we're
talking
doing the
about
appraisal.
right. So Andrew is the compliance broker from which
Prestige.
Prestige. And he is going to talk about the ways to work with an appraiser. All right. So anything else, just give us a call. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.